Tasting Anarchy, your wine and liberty podcast. Join Mason and Jake each week as they try new wines and discover how much government is in your drink. All right, Mason, this is a good episode for just you and me this week. I don't know. I've been kind of like going back and forth on how we should do introductions because like I still sort of feel like I should be like, this is Jake from Tasting Anarchy and I'm joined by Mason, but I don't know.
I think it is good to establish whose voice is who.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
But I don't think we need to say this is Jake or Mason from Tasting Anarchy because they already know that.
That's true.
And so I think what a good intro would be, Jake, what are you drinking tonight?
All right, well, that is a good intro, and I'll go ahead and talk about this. Once again, I am drinking a Texas wine because I like to buy things that are in the state that I live in.
And things that aren't, because given your huge shipment that's on the way.
Well, that's true. So actually, after this wine, it's going to be, well, actually, it probably won't be a very long time because, you know, at Childeberg, you and I are going to get some wines from three wineries in that area.
Oh boy, do we have an announcement about Childeberg.
Oh yeah, we do. So that's going to be, we'll save that toward the end. But this week I have got a pretty good, well, here's the thing, is you and I talked a little bit about the show, and I don't want to be dishonest to the listeners. And I also don't want to berate the winery, or berate, is that the word? Berate?
Berate would be like shouting negatives.
Okay.
So you never berate anybody.
That's true. So I told you before the show started, I was like, well, I'm not going to say anything bad about them. And you and I, as we talked, I kind of reevaluated that a little bit. So this wine is from Blue Lotus Winery. I visited them, and I really, really liked their location. It was very pretty. I have some pictures. I think actually I put them up on Instagram, so if you guys want to go check out my Instagram, which is you just look up Jacob Lindsay, and you'll find my Instagram, or
Linzy.
That's right. That's right. Linzy. I might have put some of them up on the Tasting Anarchy one. If I didn't, you know what? I'm going to check after this and see, and I'll go ahead and post them then. But I visited this winery. I really liked it. The lady there was super nice, and I bought 2 wines and a mead from them. Both of the wines are not my favorite, and I could see if I drank them there, really enjoying them. But as compared to the other wines that I have a lot of very high quality wines here, and I've been drinking very high quality wines lately. And so compared to those, just really not the best.
So this is one of those things where, knowing you, I don't think this is the case. So there are 2 things that come to mind. So saying that, you know, if you're drinking it there, you might have enjoyed it a lot more. Like, there's the terroir of a winery or a wine, but like also there's the idea of a terroir, and it's not something we go over often about where and when you consume it. And like I'm in a dark room in my house that's not as cool as I'd like the room to be. How much does that affect my taste of the wine? Like when you and I were just enjoying a wine together, and the fact that you could speak words to the things that I was tasting and couldn't get the description of, how does that change my ability to enjoy it? On top of that, most of the wines you've been getting are from Last Bottle, which is a very high reputation source.
Right.
So how much does that jade your judgment on this?
Yeah.
But I think you are familiar enough with wines themselves to say that, this wine, which is, I'll give the name in a second, and there are 2 great varieties I don't know, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And that might be the thing, is it may not actually be bad wine, but, I mean, do you know these varietals?
Yes, I do. And actually, you and I both have had Aglianico, or Aglianico, I'm not sure how to say it.
I realize now I have.
We both had that. That's an Italian one. And then Sinsalt, I don't know for sure that you've had that. I've had it in blends. This particular wine is called Dos Uvas, and it is from Blue Lotus Winery. It's 50% Aglianico and 50% Sinsalt. It's 13.5% alcohol by volume, and these are the notes that I have for it: is light fruity flavor, light tannins, light body, overall a light wine. And today was a very hot day. It was about 90.
It was 90 here.
Oh, nice. All right. Yeah, so it was a warm day, and maybe out on my porch or something like that, I could see this being a good red for drinking in the heat. I would probably, if I was outside, choose a chilled white instead. But this was so light that I could see in certain circumstances it being good. And I think if you and I were just kind of like chilling out at the winery in particular, because it's a really cool place, that like you and me just like, you know, chewing the fat or whatever and drinking this, we would have a really good time.
Gotcha.
But I just didn't think it was that great. I had one glass of it before we started the show, and I actually, just because I wasn't really that crazy about it, I switched back over to Freak Show, which, you know, I like Freak Show, and I recently got a couple of bottles of it for very cheap, or Victoria bought them for me, so that was very nice of her. Although, what's interesting about this, and I think maybe it is that I'm getting a little bit jaded on quality of wine, is I don't think this is very good. So,
well, I think Freak Show is very different, but I think it's also, it doesn't pretend to be what it's not.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so like Freak Show, it's like, no, this is our take on a cab.
Yeah.
It's not, hey, we're a cab completely.
Exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, like, I'm actually enjoying it, and now that you and I have started talking, I'm enjoying both of them better. So it is kind of like in the void of me only, you know, by myself trying the wine or whatever. I didn't really enjoy either one. The other one that I got from Blue Lotus was their Tempranillo, and I kind of felt the same way about the Tempranillo from them. It was light-bodied, light tannins, light fruit flavor. It was just overall too light. It was not what I expected from a Tempranillo. The mead, on the other hand, was very good. And I'm not a huge fan of mead, but this was not overly like alcohol-y tasting. It wasn't boozy. It was very full raspberry flavor because it was a raspberry mead. It was just a very, very good mead. I thought it was great. Victoria loved it. She wants me to order more bottles from them because it was her favorite thing.
Well, let's ask this question. So I don't particularly care for honey as a standalone flavor.
Right.
So mead has never been particularly something I like, but I also think mead is very heavy.
Yeah.
Was this a light mead?
It was lighter, yes. So, and that seems to be what at least from the limited experience I have. They do offer quite a bit of different wines. They're also, where they're producing the grapes, they are 100% Texas. So with the grapes and with the honey, they're 100% Texas, but they're producing them in a location that's a little bit different than where Texas wines, from my experience, come from. And that is, it is Central Texas, but it's Central Texas closer to Houston. So more humid, hotter, just a very different environment.
So that sounds, humidity-wise, because I know Houston is very humid, you know, being on the Gulf Coast. That sounds like a lot like the Virginia AVAs, except for because I know in Texas you get more consistent heat.
Yeah, and also we're not getting the elevation, and that's going to also affect it. Is that when you go inland in Virginia, you do get the elevation, which it is still very hot and very humid there, so you do have the same types of problems. Yeah, but
the elevation's like under 200 feet, so I mean I guess that's true. Huge.
Yeah.
But
I guess that's true.
I mean, if Houston is complete plains, that would be more like the AVA you would expect outside of the Del Mar Peninsula, the Virginia Peninsula. Yeah. For those who don't know, it's called the Del Mar Peninsula, and I really didn't know that until like 2 years ago. So, but yeah, the Del Mar Peninsula, but that has a huge cross breeze being on. So
I wonder what that part of Texas is like as far as wind goes, because you know one of the things is you can grow grapes fine in a humid area, but the problems that you get are various types of rot, and that is mitigated largely by breeze. So if you can get a lot of that humidity to kind of clear out, and you get a lot of breeze to go in and try and dry out the grapes so that they're not getting this mildew, you end up getting a very decent crop. You know, actually. Not too far north of the Del Mar Peninsula, southern New Jersey, you do get very, very good Bordeaux blends or Bordeaux style blends, and I'm sure that you get good stuff in the Del Mar Peninsula too because of the breeze. But and you know what, you may get great stuff down by Houston. I don't know. This is my only experience to it, and as much as I hate to give a negative review on something, I just don't think this wine is for me. It's way too light in flavor.
This may be talking out of my butt, but I'm betting Houston probably doesn't have, like, Houston has a lot of from my understanding, Houston has a lot of rain, but it's probably like more like Miami where it rains a lot, but there's consistent sun. So they probably have an over-ripeness problem because of the heat and the consistent sunshine. So they may have to pull the fruit early so the flavors aren't developing as much on the grape growing.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that the grapes, one of the things that is a problem is that if it rains right before harvest, you have to make a decision. Do you let them sit or not? Because if it rains, the grapes become engorged with fluid.
So 2015, when was the Houston floods? 2016?
I wonder. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Let's look it up real quick. Yeah, 2016 it looks like.
Yeah, so a year before the floods, but that doesn't say that it, I mean, it could have been a lot of flooding before then.
It could have.
Yeah.
And one of the things, if you go to their website, they have a lot of their wines on sale, so it could be that just they had a couple of bad years. It's hard to tell. I'm interested to get other stuff from them just because, like I said, it's a cool place. But they're not growing the grapes there yet. They are going to later on, because I talked to a lady who was there and she was like, well, right now we don't have anything put in. This was Hill Country. So their Hill Country location, they just don't have any vines yet. But they do have coming in the future, I guess they're going to put some. So I'm curious to see what they have coming into Hill Country. From what I understand, Hill Country does pretty well with Mourvedre, which you and I think have had that in blends before.
I think you have.
Okay, but from my experience with Texas, the best stuff that comes out of here is Tempranillo, Viognier, Albarino. I've actually had a couple of good Bordeaux blend styles, specifically out of Culmination Vineyards. They actually have two really, really good blends, but they're expensive. So, and that's the other thing that kind of disappointed me a little bit about this is that it is $32 a bottle, and that is, considering I've been getting such good deals from Last Bottle Wines, it does kind of taint my opinion a little bit on wine that I'm spending that much money on a wine and not getting something that I think is high quality.
Yeah, and that's the thing is and I would caution the listeners, we've always said we're amateur wine drinkers, but we do know a badly produced wine versus one we don't particularly care for. So for you to be on this much on the fence on it, it's not that it's badly produced, like they, just put piss in a bottle.
Yeah.
But it's not for $32. It's not a $32 bottle of wine, even given, the limited production facility, all that, all the conditions to it. So,
but
they need to step up their game.
Yeah, exactly. All that said, and to kind of close this up, I would love to talk to the producer of this because they make a fantastic mead. I would also just like to talk to them about this year, and they're doing well enough that they've been able to expand to 2 locations. So, it could be that it was a bad year. I also encourage people to just go there because it was a really cool place, and they produce several different wines, and these are the 2 that I got were the 2 that I thought I would like, and because they're both very I should have tasted them before I bought them, honestly. And she offered them to me, but I was kind of in a rush, so I was like, nah, just give me the Tempranillo and give me this other red blend. And that was a mistake on my part. I should have tasted them and maybe tried. They also offer. Let me just go ahead and read off some of the stuff that they offer real quick because I really hate to give local wines a bad review, but when I do, actually, you know what? I didn't get a Tempranillo from them. I got a Prima Vito, and I'd never had one of those before, so I really didn't know what to equate it to. And that one was actually a lot cheaper. So their Tempranillo is actually $30 a bottle. I didn't try that one. I got their Prima Vito. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. That one's $20 a bottle. So that one, now that I'm kind of looking at it, for $20 a bottle, if I recall, that was actually not terrible for $20. But I don't have anything to compare it to because I don't really know what that's supposed to taste like.
It's like when we were, because you mentioned you're sipping on Freak Show as well.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this is what we were comparing all cabs to, and now it's like, we compare most cabs to Pinot now that we've had a more high-end cab. Yeah,
and you know what's funny is that since you and I had that Pinot, I have had almost no straight cabs. It was because it kind of ruined me to them. Like I've had a few that are really good. This Freak Show is not the Freak Show cab. This is the Freak Show Red Blend.
Okay.
Which was cheaper. and not quite the quality I think of their
it's
cab.
not the same type of wine, but I personally think it's a little more for what it is. It's more along the standard lines.
Yeah,
like the Freak Show, like Pina is a very different cab, as is Freak Show a different cab. A lot of the other cabs are much more middling, and I think their red blend is much closer to the blend types than Freak Show is to standard cabs.
Yeah, so. and I agree, and I think that so actually when you come out for Childeberg, we're not going to do the $1,000 bottle of wine like we said. I do have a $200 bottle of wine that I want us to do, and I'm interested to know what the difference is for us between Pina and this $200 bottle.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to be very good wine. I also got this one from last bottle. But anyways, just kind of real quick, let me do the Blue Lotus. So they've got a Primavito, they've got a Tempranillo, they've got Dos Uvas, which is what I'm drinking tonight, which is 50% Aglianico, 50% Sin Salt. They have a Merlot. They have it's called Red Lotus, which is their proprietary red blend. They have Black Lotus, which is a different proprietary red blend. They have one called Left Bank, which is Bordeaux style, from the Left Bank of Bordeaux, so probably closer to a Medoc type wine. They have a Mourvedre as well, which Jackson Blood has actually told me he thinks that Texas does Mourvedre really, really well. I just do not recall what a Mourvedre is or what it's like, but I would be curious to try theirs, especially if you and I can ever make it down there. It's not really very close to where Childeberg is, so we probably won't make it down this time, but I would like to try it and just see it. And then they have one more red, and that's the Blue Lotus, which is they say it's it doesn't say what it is, but it is cherry, bramble, berry, spicy. It's I guess just another red blend. So, and they also do port styles, so fortified wines, which I imagine those are probably better just based off of their meads are very good. And then they also do white wines, so they do a Viognier, they do a Muscat, which I don't really like Muscat. I don't know if you drink those very often. Do you?
I don't. It doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. I don't like Muscats. They're usually too sweet for me. But Viognier I do like typically, and they're usually dry or semi-sweet. And they also do a Vermentino. I'm not going to be able to say this, man. Vermentino. So that's typically it's typically like pear flavored or like fruity apple kind of flavored or lemongrass kind of. So they're more acidic and very aromatic, but a little bit sweeter than what I want. So now, granted, I also drink Albarino, which is off sweet, and I like Albarino a lot. So I sometimes like once in a while I'll be like I like dry, and then I have this one that's like totally off to left field or whatever that's not at all related to what I think it's supposed to be. It's just that's just kind of how I am, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I am drinking another wine out of my Splash wines that I got for my birthday back in January. This is, and I am not going to pronounce this even close to correct, Les Beaux Galets Vin de France red blend. So it's a LES space BEAUX space GLAETS Vin de France. There's a wine of France, so given that they're not defining the region on the bottle, generally that means probably not that high quality.
Yeah. Well, either that or it's... See, this is one of the things that's interesting about European wines is that if it's a Vin de France, then it is either lower quality or they're trying to do something that doesn't fit into the standard appellation guidelines. So, like, for example, it could be a 100% Bordeaux, but they are not doing it in the style of Bordeaux. And if they're not doing it in the style of Bordeaux, they can't call it a Bordeaux.
Yeah. So this one is from the Car-Casconi region, to the east of the Languedoc-Rosani. So it's one of those ones that the appellation is apparently popular, but this is $14.95 bottle of wine.
Yeah.
From Splash. It's not the end of the world. It's not the best bottle of wine I've ever had. When I first opened it, it was much more aggressive. since I've had it open, it has a synthetic cork. I don't know if I didn't recork it well enough. It's definitely oxygenated, and it's mellowed significantly where it kind of loses all of the flavor. Okay. So it definitely tastes of red wine. It's a good table wine. It's one of those bottles that you and I would enjoy it together.
Yeah.
But with the idea that I'm having a glass, you're having a glass, maybe a glass, glass and a half. Our wives are having half a glass. Friends are having the other half of the glasses. Like, it's not one of those ones where we would necessarily drink the entire bottle ourselves. It's about 12% alcohol by volume. Doesn't really have a name or a vintage year on it. That's the other thing that leads me to believe it's not particularly good standard French wine.
Right. Given
that usually when they produce a vintage, they will put the year on the vintage. I may be overlooking it, but I don't think so. So, it's one of those, it's not bad, but I've had it open for 4 days now, maybe. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of just fully fully oxidized.
Yeah.
And it's not super strong. Now, the flavors that the splash wine will give you kind of quick hits on it. Flavors of blackberry and spicy currants. I don't know currants very well, but blackberry for sure when it was originally opened. Mm-hmm. It's a blend of Grenache, Merlot, and Cinsault, which I'm not super familiar with. The Cinsault, now obviously Merlot and Grenache I'm pretty familiar with. I don't know the blending amounts on that. It's one of those ones where really good when you first open it. Actually, no. Maybe I wrote the name down? Now I'm seeing Cinsault, but I wrote down a different wine, so I may have pulled the wrong one, or maybe they changed the blend, because I have Carganara.
Oh, I see that, yeah. I wonder what that is.
So I don't know if I pulled the wrong blend, or if there's multiple ones.
Or maybe it's an alternate name for the same thing.
No, I'm pretty sure I just managed to completely make an idiot of myself. Or I pulled that varietal from vivino.com.
Oh, okay. Let's see. It says alternate names. It doesn't have any alternate names. It just says that Carganara is, or Carignan, I guess. Origin from Spain. Doesn't give it an alternate name, so maybe it's just a mistake.
Most commonly known as Mazuelo,
okay.
Or Carinene, southern parts of France. It's a Spain varietal that's popular in southern France. But, so, not the end of the world, not the best wine I've ever had, but not so much that I would pour it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think that's actually a really great way to describe wine in general is, would you pour it out? That just kind of just occurred to me because I did pour out a wine not too long ago.
Yeah.
Where I had a couple glasses and I was kind of like, I think I've only done that twice. Mm-hmm. I poured out that one Spanish that maybe it was for somebody else, but it was so astringent to me that I was just like, I can't drink this. And actually I shared a glass of it with Mr. Sue when he was up here. Mm-hmm. And then I've done it one other time with the sparkling, and it wasn't that the sparkling wasn't good. It was just that I just had enough of the sparkling, and I kind of had kept it in the fridge for a long time, and I was like, you know what, I'm never going to drink this, and I just poured it out.
And at that point, it was probably like...
it's probably no good anymore anyways.
Yeah. So, before we get to our topic, I think we have a couple of things to talk about.
Sure.
Real quickly. I believe we have had the first of the Superior grapes announce that he is coming to Childerberg.
That's right. So I think that we can actually announce this because he says that he's coming. And if he doesn't
said it on a recorded and posted episode.
Right, exactly. Said it on a recorded and posted episode. So it looks like Scott Horton is actually going to be coming to Childerberg, which is really cool.
Yes.
I
think beyond cool is...
Yeah, exactly. I have a hard time... Like, I want everybody to realize, like, how... When I first understood that he may be coming, I was in Nebraska visiting my sister, and I was trying to tell everybody, and none of them really understood because I was like, you have no idea how big of a deal it is that Scott Horton is going to be there. Yeah. And I would really encourage everybody who's going that listens to this show not to fan gush over him because he is a normal guy, but and he wants to just have a good time with everybody else. But it is such a big deal to me and to you that
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of those things where, like, Scott is a name amongst himself.
Right.
If you look at the reverence and the position people like Tom Woods and Jason Stapleton they put on Scott, it's super important. And, you know, he represents a strain of libertarianism and the anti-warism that, you know, we all can take a strain to emulate and respect and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But he's also one of those guys that it's not that Tom isn't a normal guy, but can you imagine Tom camping?
I can kind of imagine him camping, but I just feel like it would be not at Childeberg. I feel like it would be more like cabin camping.
Yeah. And I think that's what will eventually Childeberg will be able to offer too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing is, like, I don't see Tom as the type of guy to be like, I'm going to a camp thing.
Right.
I could see Tom saying like, oh, like, I'm going to this because there's also the Libertarian National Convention and this is the coolest hotel and it's a camping hotel.
Yeah.
So, but like Scott is one of those connections to the upper echelon of the libertarian movement. Like, you know, if Walter, like, I have a personal feeling that if Scott needed to talk to Walter Block, he could get a hold of Walter Block.
Yeah.
He may have to text Tom, but he could get a hold of Walter Block.
Right.
And he can get a hold of Tom if he needs to.
Yeah. And you and I, just to kind of like clarify this for the audience, especially for new listeners who don't know who we're talking about, like for you and me in particular, I don't know how much for you, Mason. Like Walter Block to me is like the end all be all of libertarianism. To me, he's like the highest of the high. But
so because Walter doesn't put out a lot of media, mm-hmm. It's one of those things where, like, I very much enjoyed almost every episode I've ever listened of Tom Woods.
Right.
But because his topics vary so much so often, I sometimes get off of the strain of what he wants to talk about because he's talked about so much.
Right.
But Scott so consistently is only talking about the anti-war things.
Right. And that is clearly his passion and his area of expertise as well. Whereas Walter Block I see as like the spiritual successor to Rothbard. So I consider myself a Blockian.
And that's what I was going to say is, like, the thing with Scott is I think it matters so much more, mm-hmm. the anti-war things, because of the tendrils on how, like, you know, listening to like how the war movement with threatening Iran and Venezuela, how that flows into everything else.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is so important. And then, like, when it comes out, then you see people like Scott or Walter Block step up and he's like, well, yes, Scott's right about war, but here are these 19 million other things that directly relate to them. And it's one of those things where it's not that I don't think I could have a conversation that would be enjoyable to both myself and Walter Block. Mm-hmm. I find it hard to imagine being able to entertain Walter Block. And not that Scott is some lesser person, but I feel like Scott is more somebody I'd be able to entertain.
Yeah, I mean, you remember back like when GW was running?
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, he was like, well, he's the guy that you could have a beer with.
Yes.
I agree with you. That's sort of how I see Scott Horton, is he's like this genius that knows everything about everything when it comes to foreign policy, but also just a guy that is just cool and that you could hang out with.
Yeah, the guy who's doing kickflips in the background, and Walter Block's like, I wrote 16 papers in the last 30 minutes.
Right.
And, you know, and not that there isn't a value to that.
Right.
But Scott has such an outpouring of content. And, like, I agree. Walter Block is – so there are two successors to Rothbard. That isn't David Gordon, because David Gordon is basically just Rothbard's son.
Oh, yeah. No, not David Gordon. David, maybe it is. Maybe I'm getting it wrong.
Yeah, it's David Gordon.
He's the one who Rothbard was like, he's like the most genius person I've ever met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. You're right. So, David Gordon. I'm thinking of David. Or no, not David. Who's the guy who worked for Reagan? Who was like the economist for Reagan? That's who I'm confusing him with.
Oh, David Stockman.
Stockman. Yeah. That's who I'm confusing him with. No, David Gordon. Like where Rothbard was like, he's a genius.
Yeah, exactly. So there are two, to me, spiritual successors to Rothbard. There's Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot.
And Walter Block.
Yeah.
Walter Block is like Rothbard's nephew. Mm-hmm. New York Jew, amazing person.
Right.
Just friendly, amazing, and I think Rothbard has some rough edges that I don't think Walter Block has.
Right.
Whereas I think Hans Hermann Hoppe has those because he just doesn't care. But for the people he cares about, he's not, a prickly person. Mm-hmm. So, but like the thing with Scott is like, Scott is like distilled Rothbard, where it's, no, this is the only thing that matters. Mm-hmm. Everything that's wrong with the U.S. government can be seen. Everything that's wrong with interventionism, everything that's wrong with government manipulation of the money, everything can be seen from this prism of anti-war, and he can explain it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, well, what's your portion of, your position on abortion? I'm sure he has one, but it's like that is so irrelevant to the fact that we've just killed 5,000 people in Yemen.
Right, exactly.
In the last month. Like these just defined positions, and it's like everything that's wrong with it you can see. So, yes, hopefully Scott will be able to attend. We certainly understand if he cannot. For those of you who are not us, because Jacob and I both can speak that we will not make him feel like he has stepped into, I don't know, like, he's a rock star. We're not going to treat him like that. We're going to treat him like a normal person.
Yeah.
Everyone else, same thing. Hey, if he's not your hero, hopefully by the end of the weekend he will be. And hopefully, I think this will be one of those things is, if we can get a small episode with him talking about Lars Ulbrich in that case.
Idea. Yeah.
I think that would be really good if we could get a quick episode with him, not necessarily giving us an update, but just his general position and thoughts on it. Because it's so well, like the few times I've heard him talk about it, and when he's talked to Lynn Ulbrich, the way he's able to articulate how insane that case is amazing.
That's true, and that would be really good.
Yes.
But because you've got to run soon, let's go ahead and put a pin in that topic because we'll probably
amazing topic.
Yeah, we'll for sure come back to that probably because we have a couple more episodes before Childeberg.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go ahead and move on to something that's a little bit more topical.
Yes.
And I've done a little bit of research on this and think it is very relevant to the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the tariffs that are being implemented right now by Trump. So I've got a article from Decanter magazine that I think is very poignant to the wine situation. And that
shock. It's from Decanter.
Exactly. Shock. So it's called Fresh China Tariffs, a Worry for U.S. Wine Producers. It is by our old friend Chris Mercer, or is that how you would say it, Mercer?
I think so.
Yeah. So we've read a couple of articles from him before. I believe that the last one that we read from him was actually about tariffs, and it was back in 2018. And very, very similar to this particular article. I really appreciate his journalism, actually, because his journalism is not politically motivated. He just states these are the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will go ahead and summarize the article for you. So the article basically says that in retaliation to Trump's new tariffs, China has enacted new tariffs of their own. These tariffs will mostly be agricultural products, including wine. The increase is set to go into effect June 1st. These will add an additional 15% onto American wine. Previously, the tariffs were 15% implemented on April 18th, and then an additional 10% implemented in September of 2018. The total compounded, or the compounded total tax after June 1st will be 91% on American wine.
Holy moly.
It's a lot. So wine exports to China sank 25% in value since 2018. So it is that the lower quality wines mostly from California are not being exported anymore to China. So it's mostly just high quality wines. And China did remain the fifth largest consumer of American wine despite the decrease. California is the largest exporter of wine to China. They do also recognize quality from Oregon, and they also, particularly Oregon Pinot Noir, and they do recognize quality from Washington, but to a much lesser extent. The concern is that the U.S., California in particular, will fall behind in gaining market shares amongst China's growing middle class. Australia is positioned to pick up a lot of the slack due to the quote-unquote free trade deal between the two nations established in January of 2019. Chile is also expected to pick up some of the slack because Chile also has a similar free trade agreement with China.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the end of that article. I do have another article that is related, which is from Business Insider. This is a little bit of an older article, and one of the angles I think you, Mason, and I want to take up is more related to this article, which is about Chinese imports of Australian wine.
Mm-hmm.
So this article is called "Australia Wine Exports Are Booming, and China is the Thirstiest Market." It's from Business Insider. It's by Simon Thomas. Again, a really good article because it is very non-political, non-opinionated. It is just numbers, basically.
It's just reporting.
Yeah, it is. It's just straight reporting. But it is an older article. It's from October 24th of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, honestly, I think you and I have gone over this article once before. But I don't recall when it was, so...
I don't think so.
Oh, really? Okay. I thought you and I have talked about this before, and
we have,
okay.
But I think it was further back.
Okay, that's possible.
But I could be wrong.
Okay. So 2018 was a fantastic year for the exports from wine from Australia, 11% in value increase, but reflecting an increased taste for premium wine from Australia with a volume increase of 5% in premium wines. So of the 11%, 5% of it was premium wine. 5 years ago, the wine market in Australia was $1.8 billion, and now it is $2.71 billion in U.S. dollars. The exports grew in most countries, but the U.S. had actually shrank. So in America, the consumption of Australian wine dropped by $38 million, and UK is still Australia's largest consumer. But the largest growth area was Northeast Asia, specifically China, which accounted for 1.14 billion, so of the 1.14 billion exported to North Asia, 1.6 billion or 1.06 billion is Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
So that is sort of the gist of the topic that I wanted to bring up. There's two angles that I wanted to take with this, Mason. One of the angles was I'm a little bit worried for the Australian wine market. So we'll go and start with my very negative position first, and that is that, and I have a good Mises article about this by, it's from the Mises Wire. So it's William Hogginson Wang wrote this article, and it's about how the Chinese economy is actually built on a bed of straw.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's built on a burning bed of straw.
Exactly, yeah. So the Chinese market, they do have a growing middle class right now, but because of the way that their market works, a lot of this is an expanding middle class that is not...
it's a debt expansion.
Yeah, exactly. It's a debt expansion. So it's not... So really, a lot of these people are buying wine at the expense of future generations. Mm-hmm. And... they're going to at some point default, which if Australia is putting so much faith into the Chinese market, which granted is not their largest market, still the UK is their largest market and Europe, but if they're putting so much more effort into expanding in expectation of selling to China, this is a huge mistake, I think, mm-hmm. and they're going to end up seeing the Chinese economy collapse and then their wine market collapse as a result. And this could send out really bad ramifications in the Australian wine market. And we can kind of see a parallel to this in the California wine market. So there's a number of California winemakers who were selling very large amounts to China and are now selling zero to China. And mm-hmm. so they expanded operations and changed their practices to suit the Chinese market, because the Chinese market consumption, the Chinese taste is a little bit different than the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. They do appreciate prestige, it seems like, a lot more than quality.
Yes.
And that is because wine in China at this time, because this is a lot of new money, is much more geared toward showing off to your peers that you are able to buy these very expensive wines than it is buying high quality wines. So as you and I,
it's classic nouveau riche.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's you're driving a Ferrari, but you had it converted to an automatic because you can't drive manual, mm-hmm. and you had it lifted because it was too low to the ground, and you kept ripping the bumper off.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it seems like in a lot of the Chinese consumption, this is I wouldn't I mean, actually, no, I would say this. It is a distortion of the market. And it's a distortion of the market due to Chinese intervention. Now, this distortion is further compounded by Chinese tariffs in retaliation to American tariffs that are also distorting the market.
Well, I think this is a classic example of the Federal Reserve actually being the problem. Because the Federal Reserve has produced so much excess capital in the form of – well, capital is not technically dollars.
Right.
But it has produced so much extra money that extra money has flown out of the United States like a leaky sieve as we've purchased other goods.
Yes.
So that's flown a lot into China where they're going, hey, we've got all this money – and because of the way the Chinese economic controls work, they can't really bring that money back into the United States. Which, you know, by like there was an article I wanted to send you, and I forgot to do it, where they were talking about like the Toronto or Vancouver housing market, like British Columbia.
Yeah.
Where they're blah blah blah, $1.6 million worth of like $1.6 billion worth of like money laundering.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, you're complaining they're hiding money from the Chinese government? Like, what's the problem? And because, you know, neither you or I think money laundering is a crime. So, but like, that's the thing is like the U.S. has just bled trillions and trillions of dollars off that has flown into these other markets that has then made these other people feel like they're wealthier when they're not.
Yeah. So
and I think that's the ripple effect we're going to see.
Well, and you're very, very, very much correct, and also in line with one Mr. Dr. Ron Paul, who also wrote an article on Mises about this, and his I guess diagnosis is that the issue is the Federal Reserve Bank issuing easy money to Americans, which then basically flows into China and creates a artificial Chinese middle class, which is then trying to, well, now Ron Paul didn't say this, but this is my conjecture from it, which is that now you have a bunch of people in China becoming very, very wealthy from the Chinese fiat just flowing into their country. And then they want to purchase wine. And their wine purchases were at first Europe and, you know, California. And then because of the tariffs, now they're going to transfer kind of over to Australia. So now you have Australia expanding and now California hurting from their artificial expansion. Artificial expansion. Now China is drying up. We saw, a decrease in Australian imports, but also a decrease in Chinese imports of Californian wine by a very significant percentage. And that is causing a lot of these people and this is the boom bust cycle that, you know, most people don't really, it's hard for people to imagine this when it's in industries that they are not familiar with, but when you're in wine, for example, you may expand another 5-10 acres or whatever of your vineyard in response to expecting to be able to sell more wine to China. But if the expansion in China is artificial and that dries up, or if new tariffs are put into place, your expansion was a malinvestment, and now you are flush with wine, and you should not have been producing that much. It was a false market signal, ultimately sent by the Federal Reserve Bank.
Well, and so this is not a pushback on what you're saying, but I think this is a fifth tier effect. The first tier effect is the U.S. created prohibition or enacted prohibition, which destroyed much of the U.S. alcohol market, especially in wineries, because there's no equivalent.
Right.
Like a beer producer could produce something else because the facility for bottling and things like that isn't as specialized necessarily as a winery. Not to mention most of the wineries weren't, the areas weren't under cultivation and things like that. So you had prohibition ending because like in the U.S., alcohol consumption is still going up. Right. Now we're seeing, with the end of other prohibitions possibly, that adjusting. So like you've got that first effect, then you have the fact that the U.S. isn't on, like the Federal Reserve exists, then the U.S. isn't on a gold standard, then the effect that the Chinese market, you can't trade yuan or renminbi, the Chinese currency, without using the Chinese government basically. Yeah. Like you can trade it in, between one American and another, but a U.S. citizen can't trade currency to a Chinese person without going through the Chinese controls. So, like, they can't get currency out to invest in, say, better wineries in the U.S. like they normally would. So these people are purely banking on sales volume because it's so hard to get capital out of China. So, I mean, this is like fifth order effects, but it still all stems from the fact that this is an artificial expansion. But part of it isn't an artificial expansion because it's just a return to normal from government effects. So this is like one of those things where it's like the tagline of our show is how much government's in your drink. It's so much more than you would think because like the pure idea of prohibition, how that affected U.S. alcohol consumptions across the board, like pushing people into liquor and like all these other things where it's like wine might have been like, you know, these areas that are coming under, cultivation in like El Dorado County and places like that normally wouldn't have had it. These could have been well developed cultivations.
Yeah, you might have had 100-year-old vines by now.
Yeah, or, I mean, 50-year-old vines. Because, like, Sonoma could have been discovered and really pumping out, and, like, the French could have been in, you know, showing us expertise.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Long ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very much, it's very unfortunate that that's the distortion that it's had, but at the same time, you know, we have to deal with it now, and ultimately, due to what's going on now, is that we're very much opposed to U.S. tariffs. We don't really have any control over the Chinese tariffs, but you know, I would love to have Bob Murphy on to talk about this stuff because he's such an expert in tariffs. But
well, I mean, like, to be honest, as much as I would love to have Bob on, I would love to have Walter Block on because Bob is singular. Not that Bob isn't. Bob is very broadly focused. Yeah. But I think Walter has, just because he's older than Bob, has so much more general experience and knowledge to draw into. It's like that's the thing that they said about Rothbard. Right. He like you know, several people who wrote books and, you know, sent Rothbard a reader's copy beforehand and stuff like that. Basically, he sent back 6 or 7 books worth of citations to look into. Well, and it wasn't like he goes, "Hey, I read this book once. I think this is related." He goes, page, verse, wording, and then he goes, and then, you know, look at all these other implications. And I think Bob is getting there, but I think Walter has that, and I think that's what would be so interesting to hear Walter's opinion on like just the overall impacts that like just looking back that these had created.
Yeah, and it gets very complicated because it's like intervention over intervention over intervention over intervention, and then you end up getting the result now. And so it's very difficult to see. The reason I say Bob Murphy in particular is because he is one of his specialties is in tariffs. And so he's done a lot of research and stuff. And he actually he's a very recent Mises article on the myths of the benefits of tariffs. So, and one of them is that it will help develop the domestic industry. But that's assuming that you have a domestic demand for the product. And when we get into a very, very, very specialized product like wine, you may not have we do have a developed taste for wine in the United States, but it may not be as developed as you would expect, and it may not have the demand that you could have otherwise if you had free trade across the board.
Yeah, this is the thing that like has been galling to me about the tariffs recently. Yeah. What business is it a person in Washington D.C. whom I do business with? Right. And, you know, set everything else aside, I voluntarily want to buy this good from China. Why should they artificially be able to make it more expensive for me to buy it for whatever reason? Right. What right do they have to tell me that, no, your choice is invalid and my choice is valid? They don't have any. Right. Like, and that's the thing that is so galling to me is like, you know, yes, the Chinese do terrible things, but the U.S. does those too. Yeah. And like the idea that like, oh, we have to check Chinese aggression. It's like, well, the U.S. has overthrown more countries in the last 20 years than China has. The U.S. has attacked more countries than China has. Oh, but they've tried to interfere in our elections. I'm pretty sure we gloated about interfering in the Russian elections. Yeah. And if China had elections, and it's not that they don't, but I'm pretty sure we're interfering in those too. and the Chinese know it. Like, we have the biggest spy agency in the world with the NSA, where basically there's no internet traffic they can't intercept, supposedly.
Right.
Like, it's baffling to me that, like, oh, we've got to get back at these people. It's like, no. You just need to get out of my business.
Right.
I want to buy Chinese goods. I want to buy Iranian goods. I want to buy Russian goods. I want to buy Belgian goods. It's none of your business what I'm buying.
Right. Yeah, and I agree.
Yeah.
And, I think that's probably a pretty good place to close, is that, you and I have, this is actually the last point we can make before we'll do plugs, is that you and I have talked about this before, is that, California has done this before, where basically we clean the clock of France. And when California kind of hit the scene and just sort of showed up, France, that, like, we're producing stuff that is, leaps and bounds beyond what you're producing, and then, France had to step up their game. They've changed a lot of their practices in response to California wine production. Now, granted, I think France is producing ungodly, delicious, and fantastic wines right now. California is also producing ungodly, fantastic, delicious wines right now. And by enacting these tariffs and then getting the responses of the tariffs from China and so on and so forth, and compounding all of these problems over and over again, you're really hampering quality wine from being produced. Is that there may not be the demand in the U.S. market, but right now, although it is due to funny money in China, there is a growing demand for high quality wine from California, from Washington, from Oregon, from hopefully other places, Virginia, Texas,
California, or Texas, yeah.
Hopefully Texas. Although we don't. It seems like not a lot of Texas wine leaves, but. These are good wines, and there could be an international market for it. And because of, these are unforeseen consequences, probably the Trump elite or whatever doesn't really see this, but this is a major setback. So ultimately what you and I are advocates of is free trade, just because
unconditional free trade.
Exactly. Unconditional free trade. If somebody else, and actually I'll link to this article as well, if somebody else puts a tax on our goods, that's not a tax on us. That's a tax on their people.
Their consumers.
Exactly. It's a tax on their consumers. That's a problem for them. That's not a problem for us. And if they're putting a tax on us and we're not putting a tax on them, we're getting their goods for cheaper. So I think that's probably a good place to end. I know that you've got to hang on about it, or you got one more thing to say?
We will give the one policy prescription that Tasting Anarchy has probably ever given, and we will repeat it.
Okay.
We advocate a complete and total free trade agreement. Any and all who wish to trade with us, we will trade with them with no restrictions, no caveats, nothing.
Okay.
If you want to trade with us, we want to trade with you. That is the policy that the United States should enact immediately and forever.
Yeah.
It should literally be if you believe in the Constitution as somehow a document that binds the government of the United States, it should be the Second Amendment. While I agree with what the actual Second Amendment is, the right to free trade should be like second or third, where it literally says that no, the government cannot abridge and will not abridge the right of whom you can do business with.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to end, Mason, and
yes.
I think something that you and I can both support. Let's go ahead and do plugs real quick.
Certainly. So June 8th and 9th, we will be enjoying the fresh, clean waters, hopefully, of Lake Buchanan in, North Central Texas?
I guess it would be like north central. It's a little bit northeast of or northwest of Austin.
Northwest of Austin.
Yeah.
So it'll be my first extended trip to Texas. We will be joined by Car Campit. We'll be joined by Mr. Sue. I believe there's also one gentleman's name who has helped us that I cannot remember his name.
Dino, who made our logo.
The Dino Files.
Yep. I think some of the people are coming from Peaceful Treason. Scott Horton's coming,
yes.
Or it seems like he's coming at this point. There's a bunch of other podcasters coming as well. Rolo from Rolo and Slappy Show is coming.
Yeah, this is literally going to be one of those events where it's mainly podcasters talking to podcasters.
Yeah.
I'll be driving a wine van for those of you who want to go out to the 3 wineries that we are going to attend.
A 15-seat wine van.
Yes, and it will have air conditioning, so
that's
that
right.
Texas heat will be able to cool down a bit. So we'll be having fun. We also have friendly podcasts that we are friends with, not only Rollo and Slappy and Dino of the Dino Files. We also have the Friends Against Government, where Carr and Bird have shenanigans with and without guests. We also are friends with Sounds Like Liberty, who have guests every time. But Lizzie and Nikki P getting into some cool music and hearing other people's stuff.
That's right. And Nikki P has a new podcast that he's doing as well, which is, dang it, I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to look it up later, but it's like an environmental, like a libertarian environmentalist podcast.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I wasn't exactly sure who he was doing the podcast with. The one preview episode he had, the one critique, Nikki, that I would give you is, and it maybe you introduced it at another point, but there wasn't an introduction to who you two were at the beginning of the episode. So I was a little confused on why I should be listening.
But it was good. It was interesting. And you know what? That's what's cool about it too is like you and me actually both are. I wouldn't say we're environmentalists exactly, but we do care about the environment as far as like we like nature, we like going on nature walks and that sort of stuff.
We agree with the personal property rights standpoint of the environmental standpoint.
Right.
So it was very interesting, and it was also the one episode that I've gotten a chance to listen to so far. It was very hyper specific. To the locality of New York, which I thought was also very fun because it's kind of like our episodes where it's like we're much more about wine and how it interacts, but also how we can use that prism to look at other things. And I thought that was very enjoyable.
Okay, well, I think that is all the plugs I've got, other than I guess follow us at Tasting Anarchy on Twitter. Also, I started a new group on Facebook, which is the Childeberg group, but it's probably going to end up being the Tasting Anarchy group.
Well, I think it should be both.
Yeah, I guess it'll be both. Yeah, so, or maybe we should.
But you can also go to childeberg.com to get more information about the event. Those of you who would like to attend but cannot, but have a few dollars that they could spare, we could certainly use the donations. We are also. Are we done with shirts, Jacob?
Shirts are done. But we do still have the GoFundMe campaign. So the GoFundMe campaign will end on I think it's the day that Childeberg starts. That'll be the end of the GoFundMe. So you can still give us money on GoFundMe if you want, and then if you also want, you can also go to childeberg.com and give us money on the PayPal. If you're into crypto, contact Card Campit, and he will give you a crypto address. I'm not really sure how to, I really should know more about this because you and I are both libertarians, but I just don't understand crypto really.
That's the thing is, I think we understand it perfectly well. We just don't understand the applications on the ability to give us funds. Yeah, I guess that's true. But yes, from Jacob at Tasting Anarchy, or Jacob at Tasting Anarchy, and Mason Tasting Anarchy. Have a good one, everybody.
All right, have a good night, everybody. Stay free.
Knocking down windows and tearing down doors, drinking half gallons and calling for more, drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Hoy! Drink it, man. Oh, give me some of that slop. Oh, pass that bottle to me. If you want to get along in Peterstown, buy some wine and pass it around. The age runs up to 49. All them cats, they love sweet wine. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Hoy! Wine, wine, wine. Elderberry. Wine, wine, wine. Cherry, cherry. Wine, wine, wine. Blackberry. Wine, wine, wine. Port and sherry. Wine, wine, wine. Oh, pass that bottle to me. Now down on Gill Street at Willie's Den, he wasn't selling but American gin. One soldier wanted a bottle of wine. He hipped that cat for $1 and a dime. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Now I got a nickel, have you got a dime? Let's get together and get some wine. Somebody's fifth and somebody's fourth. But when you get together, you're doing things smart. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine.